Okay. Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay?
Good morning.
Good morning. Yay, so people can hear me. That's good. Okay. Let's pull up this. Let me share this. Cool. Whoa, 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 whoa. There we go. Finally figured that out. Yay. Okay. Learning curve, guys, learning curve. All right, I'm gonna get started. Whoops, not that fast. Good morning, thanks again. Welcome back to Plant Kingdom. Today, I think it's our third class already, which time flies. If this is your first class because you just got registered, welcome. It's probably gonna take you a second to get access to Blackboard if this is your first class or if you've just recently been registered. So if that's the case, I'll be sending along stuff via email later today so that you have access to the syllabus, the recordings of the lectures that we've already had, the lecture slides, things like that. Okay, now one thing I want to find. Will somebody write something in the chat box just so it pops? Oh, here we go. Never mind. I got it. I've got this now. It's only taken 3 times, right? Okay, great. All right. So yeah, welcome back or welcome for the first time. My name's Dr. Rebecca Pinko. This is Plant Kingdom. And if you ever have any questions about anything, you could always feel free to email me. It's rebecca.panko@rutgers.edu. Okay. And please make sure you mute when you join or you remute after you've unmuted yourself. Okay, let's get started. So let's get this away. Okay, today we're going to do the Bryophytes. Yay, we're going to talk about real plants today, which is fun. Yay, real plants. Before I do that, I'll just make a couple reminders here. Move my head out of the way. Just remember that Blackboard has everything, right? Everything's on Blackboard, syllabus, lecture slides. Any supplemental information will also be available on Blackboard. Another reminder, which I'm sure you're all very aware of, is that today is the last day to drop a course, any course, and not receive a W grade. So go ahead, make sure you stay aware of that, depending on what you're moving your courses around. Tomorrow, as you're probably aware, is the last day to add any classes. So this is the first week of lab. So before you go to lab, just make sure you go to Blackboard. The lab instructor and I need to kind of talk later today. Here we go. The lab instructor and I need to talk later today. I need to see where she's at in terms of getting access to the course and whatnot. But in the meantime, any lab materials will just be posted on the lecture Blackboard page. So make sure you download the lab materials. Remember, there's no additional thing to purchase for lab for this course. We provide everything to you. Please read the lab before coming to lab. It's also, and like read over every lab will start with learning objectives. So just read through those learning objectives. The lab and the lecture are very well integrated. So the learning and objectives in the lab strongly support the learning objectives we have in the lecture. There's also going to be a word bank or a couple word banks, depending on the lab, of important terms. So you want to go into lab at least having an idea of what those terms are. Most, if not all of the terms would have already occurred in lecture. There might be a few here and there that have not. You can use the glossary for your, the glossary from the textbook as a resource to define any terms that haven't already been defined in lecture. And remember, there's also a free textbook available on the Blackboard page for the lecture page. There's a question in the chat box. Will we be sent a Zoom link for the lab? Yes, you will. All right. The other thing, you don't need to print and bring your own copy. I mean, you obviously have your own copy because everything's virtual this time. Okay. So the last class, we went through the really exciting topic, really exciting topic of alternation of generations, right? Not so exciting, kind of boring, but it's a really important concept in this course. And so we do have to, unfortunately, really go through it step by step. So we did that, if you're awake for it. And then we also, at the end of that, kind of talked about how there's a switch in generation dominance from the more early plants to the later plants or higher evolved plants. So we did that last time. And we also had a little bit of assigned reading. So we're going to do similar to we did last time, except this time I'm not going to read the questions because I realized that was pretty boring to watch if you watch this later. So we did have that assigned reading. Remember, this is not for a grade. So if you, let's say today it's your first day of class and obviously you didn't do the assigned reading, I would still go ahead and try to answer the questions to the poll, because remember, the poll this is not for any grade. This is just for me to get a sense of what, what people are doing. So I'm going to launch the second poll, and I'm also learning this technology, so I want to make sure I'm doing it right. Okay, so I'm going to launch the second poll. You should be able to see it now. There's a total of 5 questions. So please take a few minutes to answer those questions. And this is not a time to like pull up the PDF and read it or try to figure it out now. The time is past to have read the PDF. So if you didn't already, please don't be trying to like do that now. Just read these questions and try to answer it. All right. This is only supposed to take a couple minutes. So it's going to take a lot longer if you're trying to like finally pull that PDF up now, right now. So just do your best to answer the questions. It's not for a grade. I know what you guys do. Okay, we're getting there. Just about 5 people left need to submit. Okay, I'm going to give you guys about 30 seconds more to finish up. Remember, it's not for a grade, just for us to discuss. Okay, take about 10 more seconds. I think you can also submit if you haven't completed all the questions, I think. Okay, I'm going to end this poll and I will share the results so that we can talk about them briefly. Okay, so this was from the State of the World's Plants Plants and Fungi 2020 report that is posted on Blackboard. And so this section kind of talks a lot about extinction. So the first question is, what is the purpose or purposes of the red list of threatened species? So the majority of people picked assessing a species' risk of extinction. That's correct. You could have also selected informing how to prioritize conservation efforts. That's also correct. It is not a list of red species that are facing extinction. The next one is, plants on the red list don't represent all the species that are actually threatened. Why? So the correct response was that some species are not represented due to biases in the data, right? So there's a whole section in the reading about why sometimes certain species are overrepresented or underrepresented. It has to do with the amount of effort of people in a region to assess all the species. It has to do with proximity of species to cities and roads, a lot of different reasons that there are biases. So that was the correct question. So the question or the answer that this is a trick question because the red list includes all threatened plant species. No, the red list doesn't and can't probably ever because of bias, some species will always be underrepresented and overrepresented. All right, number 3 was, scientists use statistical modeling that is used by pollsters to improve the accuracy of the red list. And they did a model. And so what did their model find? So most of you selected that more species, so their model found that more species were threatened than originally estimated, right? Actually, no. Actually, no. Their model found that fewer species were threatened than originally estimated by the red list. And the reason that was because of this overrepresentation thing again, right? So because of the original way the list was set up, some species were being counted almost like more than once kind of thing, or just represented multiple times in the data. So when they actually kind of streamline things and looked at it using a model that's similar to a model that's used when you're doing political polling, they found that the number of species, there were fewer species that were threatened than originally estimated, which was actually a good thing. And then number 4 was the loss of a single species can have large impacts. For example, if the last surviving member of a lineage goes extinct. And so the correct response was the impact would be if we would lose all of the evolutionary history of that lineage, right? So for example, if all humans went extinct, there were no more humans, we couldn't use DNA, we couldn't do DNA analysis on an extinct species to learn about our evolutionary history, right? So for example, right now there's like 2 remaining white rhinos and they're both male. And so they are going to be extinct any day. Scientists are trying alternative methods to maybe make that not happen, but these are not tested and also just kind of a last ditch effort. But the point is, once a species goes extinct, you can't then use things like DNA analysis or other things particularly if that species has never been found before, right? If a species never been found before and it goes extinct, you lose not only its information, but all of the information of the lineages leading up to that species. And then lastly, what is extinction debt? Well, extinction debt is actually the money you have to pay if you make a species go extinct. No, no, it's not. No, it's not. It is a prediction. It is a prediction of the species that will eventually become extinct. So for example, if you need to destroy a certain area of forest to build something, right? The second that you destroy that area of forest, you might cause some species to go extinct. But there is an extinction debt such that there will be ramifications, right? Repercussions following that deforestation event that can lead to additional extinctions. So we can calculate how many total species will likely go extinct because of an activity over time. And that is what's referred to as extinction debt. Good. Good. So it looks like the majority of you did the reading. That's good. I'm going to close this. I think that closed it on your end too. If it's still open on your end, let me know and I'll see if I can, but I think it's closed. All right. So thanks for doing that. I'm glad you did the reading. We will do more readings from that PDF, but not for today. There won't be any assigned reading for that today. Today, we're finally going to get into real plants, right? We're going to talk about the bryophytes or the non-vascular plants. We'll go through some kind of general characteristics of the bryophytes, what the Gametophyte generation looks like, their sexual reproduction, and then we'll talk about what their Sporophyte generation looks like. And so remember in the very first class, we talked about biological taxonomy, like how we organize, how we name different species. So that we learned in that class this word or got refreshed about this term phylum. So today we're going to talk about the phylum Bryophyta, which is one of the phyla in the whole group of bryophytes. And the phylum Bryophyta is the mosses. So we're going to talk today about the true mosses and the peat mosses and some ecology and also economic things that we get from peat mosses. Okay. So before we get into the mosses in general, we kind of have to talk about plants and the origin of plants as we know it. So plants actually began in the ocean. That's where plants originated from like millions of years ago, was in the ocean. And we know that, or we know that for several different reasons, but one of the reasons that we know that is because that plants and green algae actually share many characteristics. For example, they both have the same type of photosynthetic pigments that allow them to do photosynthesis. They both store food as starch, and both of their cell walls contain glucose. So these are some characteristics that they share. Because of these things and because of things like genetic analysis and the fossil record and other reasons, we come to the conclusion that green algae and plants are the closest living relatives of each other, right? So like plants on land and green algae are living relatives, right? Closest living relatives, and that they both are derived from a common ancestor. But as we know now, plants live on land, right? That's where we see most of our plants is on land. So how did that happen? How did plants, living in the water is a lot different than living on land, right? We, for example, can't live in water unless we have like a lot of help with technology and submersibles and et cetera. So you can't just really easily go from like living in water to like living in the land and vice versa. So how did plants make that jump from living a life in an aquatic environment to a life in a terrestrial environment? So based on the fossil record, we think that the first land plants appeared approximately 400 million years ago. Approximately, right? It's like we weren't there, and we only have, fossil record isn't a complete record, so we have to make our best guess. And so our best guess is about 400 million years ago. And the reason that plants were finally able to make that leap to go from a aquatic environment into a terrestrial environment is that they had certain features that developed. So for example, a cuticle that helped them not dry out on land. So when we think of the word cuticle, maybe we're thinking of our nails, right? Like, I got to do my cuticles. Okay. Yeah. But a cuticle in biological terms means like a layer of, you can think of it right now as like a skin cell layer, but it's like a layer on the outside of your surface that prevents you from drying out. So plants developed this cuticle, and then they also developed, okay, here's some scary words, don't get scared. Gametangia and sporangia that were multicellular. So gametangia that were multicellular, sporangia that were multicellular, and gametangia and sporangia that were surrounded by something called a sterile jacket of cells. So before you get scared, remember the gameto, right? So gamete, so it's still that gameta thing, right? Gametangia just means a thing that has gametes or makes gametes. And sporangia just means a thing that makes spores or things that make spores. So in this case, this is saying, it's like a different way, but don't get mad about that. So basically like gamete producing things that were multicellular and spore producing things that were multicellular, and both of those things also surrounded by a sterile jacket of cells. So the idea is that in the water they were single cellular, and in the water they were not surrounded by a sterile jacket of cells, right? Often they would just be floating around in the water. The other thing is that the zygote, right, the baby plant, is now protected from the environment by being surrounded by tissues. So those things, cuticle, multicellular and protected gametangia and sporangia, and protected zygote, are what allowed plants to make that initial leap onto land. All right. Now that we know how plants made that leap to land, we can start to talk about some of them, right? So we'll talk about the bryophytes. So in the first or second class, we had that kind of roadmap of where we're going to go in the course. So today we're in this part of that map, which is the non-vascular plants, right? Or the bryophytes. Bryophytes is another word for the non-vascular plants. And those are the mosses, the liverworts, and the hornworts. All right. We won't have time to talk about all three of these today. We'll only talk about the mosses today. Next class, by the way, next class, I won't be in Brooklyn, New York anymore in this bunker. I will be back in Michigan with my pretty plants and everything. So, yeah, next class, we'll talk about the hornworts. And next class, we will also talk about the liverworts. But today we'll talk about the mosses. Mosses are in the Phylum Bryophyta. Phylum Bryophyta. Just a little tip here for you. Anytime you see, wow, that is a big line. Here, let's make that line smaller. Anytime you see this ending, phyta, it's always a phylum. So like if you saw, this is not real, but if you saw like banana phyta, right? It'd be like the phylum, the banana phylum. Okay. So anytime you see the word phyta, that means phylum, phyta. Okay. Just a little tip, because you're going to learn a lot of phyla in this class. Okay. It's always good to have these little grammatical tips. All right. So let's before we just jump into the mosses, let's just talk quickly about the word bryophyte. So remember I said bryophyte. Bryophyte is not a phylum name, right? It's not phyta. Bryophyte is a collective term for all of the non-vascular plants, right? What you can, and here's what you can think of. I gotta move this doodad out of the way. Annotate. So if you pull the word apart, we already learned that phytes means what? Does anyone remember what phytes means? You could throw it in the chat box, you could yell it out. Phyte, like gametophyte or sporophyte, or in this case, bryophyte. Plant, yes, it means plant. Good. So phyte means plants. And the word here, it says the word bryon is Greek for moss. So whenever somebody first described the bryophytes or the non-vascular plants, they thought they were all mosses. They were just like, oh, look, moss plants, right? Remember, phyte is plants, bryon is moss. So it was like, oh yeah, the moss plants, right? However, as we discovered more and more plants, we realized, oh wait, they're not all mosses. They're also liverworts and hornworts. So now the word bryophytes means all the non-vascular plants, but they're originally named for the mosses. And one characteristic that all of the non-vascular plants have is that all the non-vascular plants need water for sexual reproduction. So that's because the sperm literally swim. So you might think of plants as never moving and, you know, it doesn't move, it doesn't have cute eyes, not fuzzy and can't cuddle it. But plants move, they move a lot, usually a lot slower than we can observe with our human eyes. But if you were to watch sperm from the bryophytes, sperm swim, like legit straight up swim. So therefore they need water to swim through in order to have fertilization occur. Okay, so bryophytes is the non-vascular plants. All of the bryophytes, the mosses, liverworts, and hornworts, are what we call pioneer plants, or if you're going to speak in ecological terms, early successional plants. And what that means is that they're the first to inhabit or colonize a newly exposed part of land or habitat. So, So for example, let's say there is a volcano and the volcano erupts and covers all of the land in lava, right? And now it's just that, and it dries and it's all rock and lava and there's no anything there, no plants, no anything. Well, mosses, liverworts, and hornworts, or the bryophytes, are usually one of the first plants to kind of show up when you have that newly exposed habitat. Another example could be if you have an island, right? Let's say there's an underwater volcanic eruption and it causes a new island to emerge out of the sea, right? That would be newly exposed habitat. And so the pioneer plants, or those early successional plants, will be the first to kind of show up there and establish things. So all the bryophytes are capable of doing that. Because they need water to have their sperm swim, most of them live in moist habitats like tropical or temperate forests. However, they can actually occupy a lot of many different habitats. For example, even in the desert, which we'll talk about a little bit more, but they still need water to make their sperm swim, even if they live in the desert. Oh yeah, here, we're going to talk about it right now. So some species are now like adapted to these super extreme environments. So for example, a desert or like the Arctic, or the tippy top of a super high mountain, thousands and thousands of feet up, right? And some can even grow as what we call epiphytes. Epiphyte means a plant that grows on another plant. So I don't know how many, if you guys have had certain house plants, but if you've ever bought an air plant, for example, ooh, an air plant, you know, sometimes you see those as a little, anyways, yeah, that's another example of an epiphyte. So a plant that grows on another plant. We will cover, we'll see the word epiphyte again, and we'll see the terms like early successional pioneer plants again as well. Okay. So even if they live in those extreme environments, they still need water to have the sperm swim at some point. Okay. So let's just take a moment to appreciate mosses and their in some of their more natural habitats, right? So here is a picture. This is from Connecticut. You could see moss growing on this rock. You could see moss growing on the base of the trees and on that downed log over there. Oh, I see a raised hand. Yes. Yes, whoever raised your hand, either feel free to write in the chat box or unmute and ask a question if you want.
Sorry, I clicked on it accidentally.
Oh man, I was so excited. No worries. Yeah, feel free. You can raise hands if you ever want to, guys. Just so you know, I'm still new to this, but it did pop up. It did say it. Okay. All right, so here you go. Mosses in their natural habitat. Here you go, more moss in its natural habitat, right? You got this down tree. It's already now covered in moss, right? So remember, epiphyte grows a plant that grows on other plants. Well, look, this is a dead tree. It's another plant. It's still a tree. It's just dead now. But the mosses are growing on it, right? They probably were also growing on it before the tree died. It's just that now the tree's dead, they can really go to town. You could also see here mosses on the rocks. In this image, here is a close-up of some sphagnum moss, which we'll talk about later in this class today. Here's a, ooh, nice fluffy, I think this is a Christmas moss, or at least that's the term, Christmas tree moss, I think, because it kind of grows in a little triangle. Fluffy moss. So this is what you think of when you think of moss, hopefully, right? Like green and fluffy, green and fluffy. This is kind of a hodgepodge of different mosses. There's also some liverworts in here, but you don't need to know about that. Oh, there you go. So those flat things in the middle, I'll circle them. All of this stuff here kind of looks like ribbons. Those are actually liverworts, but all of this stuff here is moss. There's over here some more moss. So just kind of gives you an idea of they can all occur together, right? They like the same kind of conditions. Okay, here's an example of a moss that's doing just fine in a pretty extreme environment, right? Like covered in snow, doing fine. Okay, so some pretty pictures of mosses and other bryophytes, right? Liverworts showed up there too. All right, so the word bryophyte means a phyte, right? It's like kind of like a moss, right? And by kind of like a moss, we mean it's non-vascular. So that's why this whole group of plants are called the non-vascular plants. So what does that mean, non-vascular? Well, you can think of a human version of vasculature, right? So like we have veins and arteries and capillaries and other things like that inside of our bodies that are the vasculature, right? That of our system, right? Like a vein. Well, plants have that too. It's just that we don't call them veins and arteries in plants. We call them other things. And the main vascular tissue in plants are what are known as xylem and phloem. So you may have encountered these terms in other biology classes, but xylem and phloem. So bryophytes, mosses, liverworts, and hornworts, don't have that. They don't have xylem and phloem tissues, right? So non-vascular means that they lack true xylem and phloem tissues. So instead of xylem and phloem tissues, the gametophyte plants have these other cells that allow them to kind of move water and food around, right? So instead of xylem tissue, which normally moves water around, gametophytes in the bryophytes have hydroids, which are like, they kind of help conduct, but not super great. Hence the conducting in quotations, right? It's like they kind of conduct, but not so much. And then instead of phloem tissue, which typically conducts food in the vascular plants, in the non-vascular plants, we have these things called leptoids, which kind of help move food around, kind of. Okay. But the main takeaway of this is that these are non-vascular plants. And yes, they do have these cell types, but these cell types are not efficient conductors, right? They are bad at moving stuff around. So most of the way that water and food moves around inside of the bryophytes or the non-vascular plants is via these processes of osmosis and diffusion. That's the primary way that things are able to move. This is just showing you a picture of what it kind of looks like. It's not that mind-blowing of a picture, unfortunately. But the main thing this is showing you is here. It tells you that the hydroids are towards the center and that the leptoids surround the hydroids. The reason why that's kind of important and interesting is that when you do get to the vascular plants, it's a similar structure in terms of xylem and phloem, and that the xylem is always toward the center and the phloem is always outside of that. So hence why we have this slide here. Oops, come on. It's just showing you that. It's just showing you that. The leptoids are the larger cells, kind of toward the middle. Sorry, the hydroids, sorry. The hydroids, or the water conducting cells, are toward the center, whereas the leptoids surround that, right? So all of these littler cells are the leptoids. Okay. Oh, this is just them from a different view. Don't worry too much about them right now. Okay. So remember last time when we talked about the alternation of generations and how the earlier plants have the Gametophyte generation dominant? Well, bryophytes, right? Mosses, liverworts, and hornworts are those earliest land plants. And so those earliest land plants have a dominant gametophyte generation. The gametophyte generation is dominant in the bryophytes. What does that mean? It means that the sporophyte is never free living, never. The sporophyte is always attached to the gametophyte, always in the bryophytes. Whoops. So sporophyte is never free living. The gametophyte is free living, but the sporophyte's never free living. Sporophyte remains attached to the gametophyte. I am so bad at annotating. I very much apologize. It's not something they trained me how to do. Yes. So gametophyte generation dominant in the bryophytes. Dominant. What does dominant mean? Somebody asked me that earlier in another class. Like, what does it mean by dominant? It means that it is the primary generation, meaning not first or second, like the one that's there most of the time. The one that's there longest is how it's dominant. But in this case of bryophytes, there's other things about it that allow it to be that dominant one. So number one, it's larger than the sporophyte plant. Hence, the sporophyte plant later will be attached to the gametophyte plant. The gametophyte is also photosynthetic in the bryophytes, so it's able to make its own food. Long-lived, that's the dominant part, right? That's the dominant part because it's the main generation that exists. Gametophyte is totally independent of the sporophyte, doesn't need the sporophyte for anything. It can just live its life without the sporophyte. And most importantly, and we should already kind of have an idea about this, is that Gametophyte plant is haploid, right? Because the Gametophyte plant is always haploid, always, or 1N, which we talked about last class and a little bit the previous class. Okay. In addition to those things, the Gametophyte, what does the Gametophyte do? We already know it in the name. We know it in the name. Let's change colors. We know it in the name. We already said what this word means, right? Phyte. Earlier, people said it means plants. What does gameto? Ooh, that's a really bad line. What does gameto mean in this case, or I guess in all cases? What does this phyte produce?
Egg and sperm.
Yay, egg and sperm, or gametes, right? Gametes, egg and sperm. So it's in the name. Thanks, Latin and Greek roots. Like it's in the name. So we know that this plant is a gametophyte plant. We know it produces egg and sperm. So, it says it on the slide. And we learned last time that the eggs are made in female sex organs, right? Archegonia. And there's going to be one egg in each Archegonium, which is the singular. And that the sperm is going to be produced in the male sex organs, antheridia, or singular antheridium, right? Okay. Okay. Yeah. And just for a recall, in case if you get to this slide when you're looking at things and you're like, I don't remember those words, I pulled this from a previous lecture. Okay. Oops. Okay. I don't care about this right now, but basically, like, they are very simple plants, and so they just have one part that divides to make the plant longer. I don't really care about this right now, but just know that because the bryophytes are non-vascular plants, they don't have like true leaves, and they don't have like true stems, because botanically speaking, if you don't have vasculature, right, if you don't have xylem and phloem, you don't technically have a leaf, or you're not technically a stem. So we say like leaf-like, like the bryophytes have leaf-like parts that kind of look like leaves. They have these things, rhizoids, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And then they have these, like I said, stem-like, because they're not real stems, stem-like parts. And the stem-like parts are where you have those cells that we just talked about, right? The hydroids and the leptoids. The stem-like parts also have a epidermis, just like we have an epidermis, right? A skin cell. And then another region that I don't care about you guys knowing right now. I want to get more into the plants themselves. Just so you know, rhizoids, like I said, the bryophytes don't have real leaves, they don't have real stems, and spoiler alert, surprise, they don't have real roots either. So what they have instead are these like hair-like things that allow them to grip onto surfaces. So for example, rocks, or as we saw that downed tree in that picture, it allows them to kind of grip. So they don't really serve as like a root. They're not like absorbing water as much as they are holding the plant down so it doesn't float away. Because remember, they need water to have the sperm swim. So if you just add water to them, then the whole plant will swim if it's not anchored down, right? So that's what these rhizoids help to do. You can see the rhizoids coming out here. They look like little hairs. You can see the rhizoids here. This is just showing them, all of these plants anchored to this rock. Okay. So that's what rhizoids are. I don't really care about this right now, but just know that in that conducting strand, in this, that's where your hydroids and leptoids are, right? So in the center here, that's where your hydroids are, and then surrounding that's where leptoids are. I don't really care about that right now, but it's there. Oops, clear drawing. Some of these slides will help you in lab. That's why they've been included here. Oh, I just told you. Yeah, so the hydroids and the leptoids. Okay, Gametophyte plant, don't worry about protonema. All you need to know is that the Gametophyte plant, when it first shows up, it starts off as a little green blob, which we talked about last time. And it doesn't really look like much. Kind of just looks like a little green blob, which is technically called a protonema. Don't worry about that right now. But then it turns into the real mature gametophyte plant. So I don't care really so much about gametophore. Don't worry about that. I care about mature gametophyte. The mature gametophyte plant, which is the dominant plant in the life cycle of the bryophytes, has the leaf-like and stem-like parts, and of course bears the sex organs because it's in the name gametophyte. The shape of the mature gametophyte plant will depend on which thing you're talking about. So if you're talking about a moss, the mature gametophyte plant is going to look different than if you're talking about like a liverwort, which we won't talk about today. But most important thing from this slide is that all the parts of a gametophyte plant are haploid. All. That's important to keep in mind as we go forward. All right, we will talk a little bit about this. So we'll talk a little bit about the sexual reproduction of the bryophytes. So this is a slide, it's showing you the female sex organ or the Archegonia, right? Because this is on the gametophyte plant, every cell that you're looking at here is haploid. And that Archegonia is going to consist of a short stalk, a swollen part that holds the egg, and then a long neck of, that will eventually break down for sperm to swim. So it's kind of upside down. But if you look here, here's that swollen part of the Archegonia. Here's that neck of that Archegonia. And this dark thing in the middle here is the egg. There's another one right next to it here. Eventually, once the egg is ready, there's some cells located right here in the neck that will break down, and that will be where the sperm can like swim down to meet the egg. This is the male sex organ. The male sex organ is the antheridium or plural antheridia. It's also haploid, right? It's also haploid. Here's that sterile jacket layer that we've talked about before. So like this whole layer on the outside is not going to make sperm. It's just going to protect the sperm producing cells inside. This is one of the features that allowed the bryophytes to have an existence on land as versus in the water. And I think I say, before you say the scary word spermatogenous, I think I actually break it down here for you. Yes, I do. Okay, great. So the male sex organ or the antheridium has a short stalk as well, just like the female sex organ. It has this covering of sterile cells to protect it. And then lots and lots of what are called spermatogenous cells or tissue. And each of those spermatogenous cells in that tissue will make one sperm. So because I don't like you guys to get freaked out if you see these long words. So like spermatogenous, that's a mouthful, right? Well, sperma is sperm. And then genus comes from the word genus, which means the origin. So if you were to break down the word spermatogenous, you could say this is the origin of sperm. So these cells will be the cells that produce sperm, the origin of sperm, spermatogenous. Okay, so we said before that the bryophytes require water, right? Because the sperm swim. So this could be water from a little stream. This could be water from raindrops. And once that water is present and the sperm can swim, the sperm will actually be chemically attracted to the archegonium, believe it or not. So there's chemical signaling occurring that tell the sperm which way to swim to find the egg. Let's see, I just want to take a peek here. Okay, yeah, I don't know if we're gonna get through that today. This is a lot. I forgot how many terms that we have to learn in this before we go nuts. So there's many species of bryophytes, a lot. There's a lot. Remember, that's your mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. And then these are some important terms that we're going to have to just get used to because they show up all the time. Is monitious or dioecious? All right. Monitious, mono means one and di means two. So ecious means house. So monitious means one house. And what this means is that the male and female reproductive organs are on the exact same plant. Whereas the term dioecious or two houses means that the male reproductive organs are on one plant and the female reproductive organs are on another plant. So sometimes students have a tendency to see the word mono and they think like unisexual or something like that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Mono means one, but it means one house. And in the case here, the house is the plant. So monitious means one house that has the male and female, or one plant that has male and female sex organs on it. Whereas dioecious means two houses. This house has the male reproductive organs and this house or plant has the female reproductive organs. So over 20,000 species of bryophytes. Some are monitious, some are dioecious. Oh, and so if we were going to say, so there's Sporophyte generation and Gametophyte generation. So which of those generations can we describe as being monitious or dioecious? Think about it. Okay. You're already like, this is crazy. How about this? Hint. Which generation has sex organs? Right? Which one? The Sporophyte generation or the Gametophyte generation? Which one has sex organs? Right. Thank you, Richard. Right. Thank you, Benjamin. Yes. So the Gametophytes are the ones that bear the sex organs. So those are the ones in the case of the bryophytes that we can describe as being dioecious because it is the houses, right, depend on where the reproductive or sex organs are located. So you can describe the Gametophyte generation as being monitious or dioecious. Yes, thanks guys. Okay. Okay, so fertilization is what we're used to, right? Sperm plus egg, boom, zygote, right? Haploid sperm, haploid egg, diploid zygote. And so that's what we call, when that occurs, the fusion of egg and sperm, that's what we call fertilization. Once egg and sperm fuse together, that is the beginning of your new sporophyte generation, right? Or your diploid zygote. Okay, so because we already talked about alternation of generations, let's kind of go through this in a bryophyte example so that we know the players that we're talking about. So let's see where here. Okay, I'm just getting oriented here, right? I guess I'll stick with purple for now. No, I'll use blue. So here, let's start here, right? So notice the color change. So the darker green in these diagrams refers to a diploid, right? Or 2N thing, whereas the lighter kind of yellow cover refers to a haploid thing, in this case, parts of the Gametophyte plant. So here's your 2N zygote, because you just had fertilization occur, right? Egg plus sperm, 2N zygote, fertilization, beginning of the sporophyte plant. So that 2N zygote is going to grow by mitosis and cytokinesis, right? Grow, grow, grow. And become a larger thing, right? Embryo. And then more mitosis, more cytokinesis, and then becoming slowly but surely kind of a larger sporophyte plant. Few things to notice in this slide, right? Where is this zygote? Where is it? It's surrounded by this kind of cream colored stuff. What is that? What the heck is that cream colored stuff? Right? It's the, yes, so Richard wrote, it's the Archegonium capsule, not capsule per se, but it is the Archegonium, exactly, because and I'll change here, put purple for this, right? This, where this 2N zygote was, this little, like I'll put a dot there, where that 2N zygote was in an Archegonium, right? Sorry, where the egg was in the Archegonium. Now the egg and sperm have fused, and so the baby plant, right, the zygote and the embryo are still going to be growing inside of the Archegonium, right? Because that's where the egg was. Remember, egg stays. Sperm swims and leaves, egg stays. Yeah, and so that's what this is all showing you here. This cream colored stuff is still that gametophyte plant that it's attached to. Because remember, in the bryophytes, the sporophyte plant is always attached to the gametophyte plant. Always. All right. So now we have here the green sporophyte plant is kind of getting a little bit bigger. Oh, yeah. This is just that same thing from before, in that now you might see sometimes this term sporogenous tissue. It's that same idea that genus comes from the origin, and sporo refers to spore, just like sporophyte. So if you see this term sporogenous tissue, it just means tissue that's the origin of spore. I know, a lot of terms today. Don't worry about that too much. All right. So here is exactly what we just saw, but in real. So here, the purple part, look, there's that neck, there's that venter, or the swollen part of the Archegonia. Inside of that Archegonia was an egg, but now that egg, oh, sorry about that. But now that egg is been fertilized. And so now we have an embryo, which is diploid. So that's what it looks like in real. And that little embryo is going to grow. Every time you see grow, think of mitosis, cytokinesis, into the mature sporophyte plant. In the bryophytes, the mature sporophyte plant is not all that much. It's not all that much because it's not dominant, and it always stays attached to the gametophyte plant. So the parts of the sporophyte plant in the bryophytes are a foot, something that's called a seta, which just means a stalk, and then a capsule. And the capsule is another word for sporangium. It's where the spores are going to be made. So that's it. That's the whole sporophyte generation. It's not that much. Just trying to see here. I feel like that was pretty, I feel like a lot of the rest is pictures. Yeah, I think we could actually get through this today. I think a lot of the rest is pictures. So foot, seta, and capsule, those are the parts of the sporophyte generation in the bryophytes. The foot is just that place where the sporophyte attaches to the gametophyte. That's all that the foot is. But because the sporophyte is dependent on the gametophyte plant, the foot is also where it can absorb like nutrients and water from the gametophyte plant. Because the sporophyte plant in the bryophytes can't do photosynthesis. So it absorbs things from the gametophyte as well as attaching it to the gametophyte. The seta of the sporophyte plant is like a stalk. So it's a stalk that holds up the sporangium. And sometimes it's really, really short. So it's kind of like, what's really the purpose of that anyways? And then lastly, probably the most important part of a sporophyte plant is the sporangium. So that's the part where spores will be produced. I don't know if you remember from the last class when we talked about the alternation of generations, but remember you have those spore mother cells, right, that are diploid. And those spore mother cells are inside of that sporangium, and those are going to be what undergoes meiosis to make the haploid spores. Oh, see? Yeah. So sometimes in the lab, you might see sporocyte. I know there's a lot of redundancy and things here. Just know that the word cyte means cell. And if some of you, I think, probably have aspirations to apply and go to med school. So even though you probably won't be maybe a plant expert, if you're going on that path, a lot of these same terms like cyte, like lymphocyte, the words like you'll see them later in our other classes as well, because they all have the same roots. Anyways. Sporocyte, cyte means cell, sporo, as we know, means spores. So it's cells that make spores, which for the purposes of our class, spore mother cell is fine, but the technical term is sporocyte. So cytes are cells that make spores. The way they make spores is they undergo meiosis and cytokinesis to make that, to make those haploid spores. We talked about that last time. And that happens inside of the sporangium, right? Or the capsule, which is this big thing here. Capsule, sporangium, same thing. All right. That's the parts of the Sporophyte plant in Bryophytes. So once the spores are ready inside of that sporangium, what's going to happen is the capsule is going to open. Don't worry about operculum for right now, but the capsule is going to open, and then the spores are going to shoot out. In some cases, shoot out. In other cases, kind of just get blown out by wind. So there's no, since there's no flowers or anything here, there's no a butterfly showing up or anything like that. It is just literally the capsule opens, the spores come out, and wind comes and blows them away. Eventually a spore will land somewhere, and then that spore will grow into the Gametophyte plant. And then that whole thing starts over again, right? So Gametophyte plant has on it the sex organs make egg and sperm eventually fuse, turn into a 2N zygote. 2N zygote grows into Sporophyte plant that has different parts. That's a quick way to have the whole alternation of generation happen, right? Sporophyte plant makes more spores. Those spores get released by wind, land on the ground, grow into Gametophyte plant. Gametophyte plant has on it sex organs. You see the thing, you see the pattern going on here. Okay. All right. So that's kind of like an overview of the Bryophytes and their alternation of generations. Now we're going to just talk briefly about mosses, which is that Phylum Bryophyta. So remember, I said before, if you see this term phyta, right, it means you are talking about a phylum. So Phylum Bryophyta is those mosses, the mosses. We're still in the Bryophytes, but we're just talking about the Phylum Bryophyta. It's the largest phylum in the non-vascular plants. And there's about 15,000 species that are currently known. Of those, the majority of them are what are called true mosses, which we'll talk about a little bit today. There's also peat mosses, which we use in certain types of economy. And then granite mosses, which we're not going to talk about at all. Okay, here are some examples of the true mosses. So remember, you have the three groups. The biggest group is the true mosses. Thousands and thousands of the species are in that true mosses. Here's what they look like. So true mosses are kind of like the thing you think about if you think about a moss, right? Like a green fluffy. Some of the mosses you'll see in lab are Polytrichum, that's how you say that, and Nium, kind of like Bill Nye, Nium. And you'll see that in lab. Oh, and to help you know how to pronounce them, I put that. So Polytrichum and Nium. These are example, it says up here, example genera. Remember when we learned phylum, we also learned like genus, and the plural of genus is genera, right? That was from that first class. Okay. Ooh, come on, thing. It's like, okay, here's some true mosses in real life, right? Like this is a picture I took, I think in Connecticut, and just true mosses growing on a tree, Like, so these would be examples of epiphytes, right? Because they're plants that are growing on another plant. Here is some more true mosses growing on a rock, right? Because they're early successional pioneer species. They can grow on kind of not so great surfaces. Here is some more true mosses. This is nice because you see those things coming out. Okay, I'll go back. So here, when you see this green fluffy, remember the Gametophyte generation is dominant. So all of this green fluffy is Gametophyte generation. And that's what you tend to see most of the time. But sometimes when conditions are right, you'll see Sporophyte generation. So here underneath down here, this is all the green fluffy. But if you see coming out of the green fluffy, here, let's use, I guess, this color. You don't really give me a lot of color options on Zoom. Look at this thing. See that thing sticking out? Look, here's a whole bunch more that are sticking out. Those are all the sporophytes, right? All of those little things are sporophytes. Look up here, this is a capsule or the sporangium. Here is the seta, right? I think we'll look at it on the subsequent slides. But just showing you here, right, that those little stalk-like things are the sporophytes and they're attached to the gametophyte plant. Here's more sporophytes attached to the fluffy green gametophyte. Yep. So just so for purposes of you guys knowing, I'll use purple again, right? So like, here's a good one. So like this, I don't know if you can see this purple circle, that's one sporangia or capsule of this sporophyte plant. Here is a seta of that sporophyte plant. You can't see it with your naked eye right now, but there is a foot down here that attaches this purple sporophyte plant to the green fluffy being the gametophyte plant. Okay. We're almost done. So let's walk through what we already kind of walked through it, but let's like see it with our actual eyes of what could happen. So we're gonna take a journey with a spore real quick. All right, so we have, let's say, here we go. Here we have two spores, right? Two spores. Spores are always haploid, right? Or one N. Those spores have already been released from the capsule. They're flown on the wind. They've landed somewhere, and now they're going to grow. When we think grow, we think mitosis and cytokinesis. So via mitosis and cytokinesis, these spores are going to grow, right? Or germinate. And then look, here you go. Grow. They're growing. And then eventually, don't worry about terms that I don't say, okay? And they're growing. And then eventually, here, these spores have each grown into a gametophyte plant. This spore grew into a female gametophyte plant. This spore grew into a male gametophyte plant. So how would you describe these gametophyte plants? Would you describe them as monitious or dioecious? So there's one plant that has female sex organs, and there's one plant that has the male sex organs. So you have two houses, right? And so, yes, there's been some participation in the chat box. Dioecious, right? Two houses, one house has, or plant has the female sex organs, one house or plant has the male sex organs. Good. Correct. Oops. All right. Oh, no. hold on, sorry, I wanted to get those away. Okay, so here we go. We have the male and female gametophyte plant in this case because this species is dioecious. Don't worry about protonema. Okay, so then eventually what's going to happen, look what's happening. You need sperm to swim, right? You need sperm to swim. So here you go. We got a raindrop drop top on top of this male gametophyte plant, and that's going to allow the sperm to swim out. Swim out. And there you go. So here we see the top of the male gametophyte plant where that raindrop has dropped on top of it. Look, raindrop. And this is here, this is a close-up of the top of that male gametophyte plant. This is a close-up of the top of this female gametophyte plant, right? So up here, that's where the eggs will be. Raindrop's going to drop on top of the male gametophyte plant. This is going to allow sperm to splash over, and the drops are going to land on top of the female gametophyte plant, the raindrops, and then that's going to allow the sperm to swim. The sperm will swim down the neck of the Archegonium, and at the base, that's where the egg is. Well, I kind of covered her up there. See that lighter thing or that little darker thing down there? That's the egg. If we were to look at that up close, that's what we see right here, right? This crazy looking swirly doodad is a sperm. This is a sperm. Sperm, which is haploid, is going to swim down the venter, sorry, down the neck into the venter and fertilize that egg. Okay. Oh. So are the male and female gametophytes close by on the same plant? So are the male and female gametophytes close by? So the male gametophytes are plants. The male gametophyte is a plant and the female gametophyte is a plant. Sometimes they will be close by one another. Sometimes it may not be a raindrop. It might be like a stream of water. And then if like a stream of water comes, it can collect a bunch of the sperm, and then this stream of water will allow the sperm to swim to a female gametophyte plant who might be a little further away. Okay. All right. Yep. So this circles are just to show you guys, this is the location of where that sex organs are. This is a slide showing you lots and lots of the female sex organs. So like this here, this is one Archegonium. Here's an egg. Here's another egg and another one. Another egg and another one. This one is great because you can really see the neck cells. Are there archegonial heads all over the female gametophyte plant? The archegonia are always, in the case of the true mosses, located at the top. So you can have many, many archegonia on the top of one female gametophyte plant. And likewise, so this here, the circle shows you the top of a female and gametophyte plant. On this slide, we see a close-up of the top of a female gametophyte plant. On this slide, we see a close-up of the top of the male gametophyte plant, or showing you all those antheridia, which make the sperm. Okay, so in the previous, we saw the sperm swim down and meet the egg. Fertilization occurs, right? One haploid sperm, one haploid egg fuse together in fertilization, 2N zygote. Here you go. Here you go. Fertilization, boom. 2N zygote, boom. Notice 2N zygote is still in that archegonium, right? Because that's where the egg was. Egg stays. Sperm swims, egg stays. 2N zygote is going to grow, grow, grow into an embryo, eventually grow, grow, grow into sporophyte plant, which we see emerging out of the gametophyte plant here. And then eventually this sporophyte plant will emerge from the gametophyte plant. Remember, in the mosses, The gametophyte plant is dominant. Sporophyte plant has to be attached to fuzzy gametophyte plant. If we were to do a cross section through a sporangium, which is what this is showing you, you would see the tissues that make the spores. We'll kind of, when we meet next time, we'll kind of refresh on this a little bit. Just before we leave, I just wanted to show you guys some cool, just before we leave, I want to show you guys. So here, this is showing you here, right? This is showing you a sporangium that's opening to release the spores. So some species have, with the true mosses, what they have is, so this is a close-up of the top of a sporangium. And there's this little lid on top of that sporangium that's called a operculum. Don't worry about that too much now. And an annulus, don't worry about that too much now. But basically the annulus is going to release. So this here is the annulus. And then this dome thing is this, oh, that's bad, operculum. And so what's gonna happen is it's like a lid. And so the annulus is gonna break and the operculum lid is gonna fly off and go away. So that's what we kind of see here. See how this one is open and you see those little dots coming out? That's because the annulus has allowed the operculum to fall off. And so now the spores can be released. On the true mosses, there are these cool doodads that are called peristome teeth. And so when that lid flies off, these weird like teeth-like things are gonna kind of come out, and that's gonna help the spores get released. So this is a picture of that. So that's the opened sporangium with these weird, like crazy looking teeth. And those little dots on the teeth are the spores. Here's another picture of that. Here's a quick little video. So there's a question here, how do they help? Well, what happens is, oh, I don't know if you guys can, let me see here. Let me stop that. And the way that they help is they change with humidity. And so here's a video of that. Can you guys see the video? So that's the top of a sporangium capsule that's opened, and that's the peristome teeth coming out. And those little green things on top of it are the spores. So when that releases like that, it just helps the spores leave the sporangium. It just helps the spores leave the sporangium. Oh no, hold on. Hold on. Oh boy, hold on, I got this. Hold on, sorry, I got a houseplant tutorial for some reason starting. So I think I'm gonna have to kind of cut this. I think I'm gonna have to stop here for today, and we'll pick up on Thursday. One thing I just wanted to mention here is that just a reminder here. Reminder that so next class we'll actually just finish up we're going to finish up the mosses, which we're almost done, just a few slides away, and talk about the liverworts and hornworts. So we'll do that on Thursday. But just a reminder that the first in-class assignment, or sorry, it's not in, I should change that. Used to be an in-class assignment. It used to be kind of like something that when you guys would show up, I would hand them out and you would do them in the class. Obviously now we have to kind of adjust that. So the first assignment that's worth a grade is due before Tuesday's class. So a week from today. So on the 2nd of February, the first assignment is due before class begins. So before 10 a.m. It is actually available on Blackboard, I think now, or it will be within the next 10 minutes if it's not already. And just so you know, so think of these as you should study for these and then try to attempt them. You can go to attempt it anytime between now and Tuesday, a week from today, before 10 a.m. So you have a whole week to do it. But just know that once you begin the assignment, it'll be multiple choice, like bubbles, right? There might be one or two like fill in a blank, right? It's not essay questions or anything like that. It's multiple choice. Study the first 2 lectures and then take the assignment, right? It's kind of like almost like a quiz format in that it is timed. So if you have accommodations that you need me to provide you additional time, please make sure you let me know that so I could adjust it in the settings. But they're not meant to be hard. If you look at the lectures and the slides, it's not meant to be hard, but they will be timed. We could talk about it more next class if there's some questions about that. My advice mostly would be do not try to take the assignment and plan on like watching the lecture recording. Because number one, it might actually like crash your system or freeze your system. Number two, the lectures are like over an hour long and you're not going to have that much time to complete. It'll be like a 10 question multiple choice thing. Yeah. So that's due a week from today, but you can start it as early as today. It only covers the first 2 lectures, so nothing that we covered today. Cool. Wow, this took longer than I thought. Sorry about that. I guess I got to work on my time management a little bit, but yeah, so good luck with the rest of your day, and I will see you guys next time on Thursday. If you have any questions, you can email me and we can discuss it. All right. Thank you guys. Have a great day. Good luck with the rest of your classes.